actually, in many ways, a genius choice. He won't be afraid to take on people like Donald Trump. But even so, the more traditionalist bishops or conservative bishops in the US church will welcome him, I think, because he certainly puts America on the stage as the first ever American bishop. But he's also got Peruvian nationality.
Yes. And as the band in St. Peter's Square strikes up, just continuing this sort of mood of celebration there, well, join in the conversation. You may not be celebrating. Maybe you feel quite differently. In either event, tell me what you feel and think now. Send me that text, send me a tweet or a voice note in your own voice. Always really keen to hear that. Join in the conversation here on Times Radio, on WhatsApp to 0333 003 2353. And you can join in. Don't just tell us what you're thinking. Say what you're thinking, and we will get you into the conversation. It all just enriches the conversation to have you involved. Now, we can now talk to someone who's right there where this is all happening. It's William Cash, who's at the Vatican, a regular Sunday Times contributor. Hello to you, William, and welcome again.
Yes, hello. Just literally in St. Peter's Square as we speak. I can just hear the bells ringing. This is a new thing. They now ring the bells when there's a new pope because there was some issues regarding whether the colour of the smoke. But anyway, it's been the most extraordinary occasion. When the name of Prevost came out, the crowd were literally stunned. Literally, there was no cheering at all. But by the end of it, people were cheering, and he was crying. We could see the tears on his eyes. It's the most extraordinary thing, but I think it's going to end up being incredibly, in many ways, very popular because it's a great sort of coalition of the fact that the church is divided. America is the battleground of the Catholic Church, and he is a liberal. But the reality is there are many more conservative bishops in America, and this is really sending a signal that they want to unify the church.
Yes.
I think this could be a very, very, very good decision.
That's a really interesting thought, William. Just forgive my ignorance. When you describe America as a battleground for the Catholic Church, tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, the truth of the matter is that Catholic leadership has been completely decimated by the sexual abuse scandal. It has now moved from the prelates and priests and cardinals to the Catholic laity. And there are going to be a lot of questions. I wrote a piece in the Sunday Times about America influence, and there's no question there are going to be big questions about the extent to which America and Trump feel they can now influence the Catholic Church. But I have to say this. It needs to be made clear. Prevost is not a Trumpista. He is a liberal. And this is a very, very interesting decision because this is a bridge-building decision. And I suspect Cardinal Dolan of New York is absolutely behind this. He has taken the role of Cardinal Pell in creating a bridge. What is extraordinary is how quickly this conclave has happened. This is sending a very serious message out that the Catholic Church needs to unite. It is not not divided in the way that people think. It's an extraordinary occasion.
And William, liberal is a word that can mean so many things depending in the mouth of the person using the word. When you describe Pope Leo XIV as a liberal, what do you mean in a little more detail?
Well, I'd like to say something about the choice of name. The choice of name is absolutely crucial. He has very deliberately not chosen to be a John Paul III or the 17th, or for that matter, a Francis II. This is a name that hasn't been used for a long time. I did actually say in an article the other day I thought it might be Leo. And it's a very, very good choice. It is a new name. And what it really is standing for, in terms of your question about liberals, progressives, it's wrong to talk about liberals and conservatives in the Catholic Church. It's better to talk about traditionalists and progressives. And I think it's fair to say that what Americans and what a lot of people will be looking for now is someone who isn't going to completely continue the progressive liberal policy of Pope Francis, but is someone who is sympathetic to it. And he is. I'm almost certain he was appointed by Pope Francis. So we've got a really interesting situation where we've got America, which is very conservative and mainstream. Now the Catholic Church led by a liberal. I think it's going to be an extraordinary, exciting situation for the Catholic Church, and people will think it's going to be bringing bridges together.
And tell me, William, I mean, describing the Pope as you do, what will they make of this new Pope in the more? I know, you steer us away from the use of phrases liberal and conservative, but in the more, let's call it traditionalist, whatever word you prefer, those reaches of the Church in places like Africa.
Okay, so my view is this. I've written a couple of pieces in the last few days saying that I had heard of very good sources that Prevost was going to be made Secretary of State. I think there's been an awful lot of deal-making going on behind the scenes. I suspect the Africans, where conservatives have teamed up with the Americans. And the other question, which is very complicated, but there are 12 Portuguese-speaking cardinals. He has spent a lot of time in Peru. This is going to be a very popular pope in Latin America, where there are 250 million Catholics.
Right.
250 million. So this is a very, very clever, shrewd decision in many ways. Although it will upset some conservatives, I think they're very pleased because they're going to see the fact that America, which, as I say, where I think there are some nearly 300 bishops are conservative, are going to be thinking, my goodness, we've now got an American pope. And he's an intelligent man, and he has been coming up the inside ranks in the last few days. So I think I'm going to be fascinated to see what the reaction is tomorrow, but I think it's an inspired decision.
All right, William Cash, Sunday Times contributor there in the Vatican. So grateful to you, William, for your insights. Now, let's welcome back to the programme Ruth Gledhill from the Tablet. Hello to you, Ruth.
Hello.
Hi, are you one of those celebrating? Do you feel very upbeat about the choice of Leo XIV? Tell me your thoughts.
Well, I really do. I think it's a fantastic choice, an inspired choice, really. And our editor, Brendan Walsh, was educated by the Augustinians. So, and he's OSA, as you know. So we have personal experience at the Tablet of the kind of amazing beneficence and the kind of really special quality that the Augustinians have. And because our editor knows the Augustinians very well. He was actually saying it could be Prevost quite a long time ago, quite a few days ago. So we're obviously all very impressed by that. I think, as William Cash was saying, he will be an incredibly popular choice. And it is actually, in many ways, a genius choice. He won't be afraid to take on people like Donald Trump. But even so, the more traditionalist bishops or conservative bishops in the US Church will welcome him, I think, because he certainly puts America on the stage as the first ever American bishop. But he's also got Peruvian nationality. Yeah. It was a Peruvian bishop for many years, missionary bishop. He has been over there. He's been over there for many, many years. He's fluent in many languages. And we've already had people... The Tablet's already been speaking to people in Peru who are saying, he was so close to the faithful over there. He really is someone who has enacted in his life that phrase that Francis made so popular, be with the smell of the sheep.
Yes, so interesting. I mean, I reported just a moment ago, Ruth, the President Trump, being among the first of the world leaders to welcome Pope Leo. But then you tell us that you can anticipate, you can imagine areas where there's going to be friction between those, the leader of the church and the President of the United States. Pope Francis, of course, famously set himself at odds with President Trump. He pretty directly criticised the Trump administration for its approach to migration, which he considered to be harsh, to be cruel. When you say you anticipate a certain amount of tension, what do you have in mind? Do you mean that? What do you mean more?
Well, I think in parts of the world, there are serious problems that have been really helped over the years by aid, which has often been channeled through Catholic agencies, but which comes from the US government, US aid. Well, we all know what's happened to that. It's gone, or more or less gone. So, there's a starting point, and you don't need to go much further than that, really.
Yeah, so, Joe, what are you thinking listening to this?
I was just reading something online, actually, about how it's interesting. We were talking about the speed of this decision.
Yes.
And actually, we still haven't had the Church of England committee to decide on the replacement for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Apparently still hasn't even met, which just makes you think about the difference in faiths and the speed at which they operate. There is something, I think, that the voids are never particularly helpful, which I think is really interesting. And obviously, I think for this idea that certainly from a UK perspective, there's a dimension, I think, in terms of the comparison that was just I've just seen online that had been made, but I think also the DEI agenda that Trump's following, and where that does leave the Catholic Church in terms of, is it going to be a sense that actually the church might be ahead of where politics is and what's being discussed by the president, for example, in terms of an agenda for a change? Is it that the church might be a little bit more progressive in some way, or is it actually that it's helpful to have a president that perhaps is less helpful on these issues and therefore, but actually for the church is helpful because it isn't pushing their buttons as much?
Does anybody else have
Thoughts on that, Ruth?
Yes, I think that what she said was really relevant and really important, and I think he will continue in many of the paths set by Pope Francis. He will continue. He already spoke in his address just now about a synodal church, and how he intends to lead a missionary synodal church, a church that will be a bridge. So although I can anticipate points of confrontation in the political sphere, he emphasised repeatedly this term bridge. So it is possible he will be a man who will not look out for confrontation, but will seek dialogue and will seek to maybe build these bridges and therefore create more unity and harmony than confrontation and division.
I mean, you follow these matters so closely, Ruth. Were you surprised by the election of now Pope Leo? I mean, I didn't follow the speculation about who was foremost in the speculation of who'd be the next pope. Was he considered a significant contender, or is he one of those who've come rather out of the blue?
Well, he was. So before there were the favourites, and then in the general congregation, Prevost was a name that was coming up increasingly in the last 2 days, along with another cardinal from the Philippines, Cardinal David. As I said earlier at the tablet, we've been talking about Prevost for quite a few days, but we didn't quite have the confidence to say we think it's going to be Prevost publicly, because that might have been just our particular preference.
I'm sure you got far too much taste to put a bet down on your.
People have been talking about him, though, yes. So he's not come completely out of the blue at all.
Right.
And once you look at him, you kind of think, it seems really obvious.
Right. So look, we've heard the Pope on the balcony. What happens from here? What is the diary of a new Pope? What is the diary of Pope Leo? What's it likely to look like? What will be his early duties in his new role?
I'm sure he will very early on visit Latin America, where there's so many Catholics, as William was saying, 250 million, and where I'm sure he'll go to Peru, and that he will travel. He is a man who has strong roots all over the world, especially in the Spanish-speaking world, and he will visit these places, and I'm sure he will do what he said he would do in his Urbi et Orbi, his address to the people and the world. And he will look at where the bridges are needed to be built, but he will also take a close, hard look at what's needed to be done in the church itself. So the financial reforms that Francis tried to implement, he will continue those and take a grip of those, I think. And also he will really try and get a handle on the continuing problems around sex abuse scandals.
All right, Ruth.
And hopefully, he will also look at leadership of women in the church.
Well, indeed. And again, Ruth Gledhill, lovely to have you with us on such a significant evening. Ruth Gledhill there from the tablet. Now, we've just got a few minutes left to us on Pinar and Friends before the end of our show, and we head over to Cape Bourse. So we'll just put a few thoughts together on what has been really, really quite a day. You're listening then to Pinar and Friends here on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Daryl Morris brings you a first look at the Sunday Times front page splash. Saturday nights from 10:30.
Fancy a fever tree? And vodka? Yes, vodka, not gin. Because this is Fever Tree Mexican Lime Soda. Yes, soda, not tonic. With Mexican lime and Japanese yuzu for a zesty, refreshing lime soda that's just sweet enough. Delicious with vodka or on its own. Fever Tree Mexican Lime Soda. Mix with the best. Now that hits the spot.
John Pinar on Times Radio.
And here with me on Pinar and Friends for the last few moments of our show, Kevin Schofield from HuffPost and Joe Tanner, a political strategist, and Kevin with the nostrils of a seasoned hound, a news hound, has been researching some of the background of the politics to all of this, the arrival of a new pope. What have you dug up, Kevin?
Well, they say there is always a tweet, and he may well be the first Pope to have had a Twitter account before he became Pope, maybe. But when he was just plain old Robert Prevost in 2015, he shared an article, a Washington Post article by a Cardinal Dolan, which says why Donald Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric is so problematic. So I think that gives you an indication of where he comes from politically. Now, we know that Trump he's had to deal with this type of thing quite a lot, not least with our own government, with all the stuff that David Lammy, Keir Starmer, you name it, half the cabinet had said about him in the past, and he's managed to just about get past that. So I'm sure it won't be a massive deal, but I'm sure it will be pointed out to Donald Trump that he has maybe been a little bit not terribly complimentary in the past about the US president.
I'm kind of wondering whether President Trump was aware of that retweet at the time that he sent his message of congratulations. I guess we cannot know that at this stage. Thanks to you for your messages this evening. Natalie, you have written in. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Natalie says, regardless of the Catholic pageantry, the size of the ask and the spiritual elation on show demonstrates how faith transcends religion. This is a moment where all of us get to see how love that is deeply felt can spill over and unite people from across the world. A warm sentiment from you there, Natalie. Thank you for that. Deborah writes in, my lovely mum used to say, you can judge people by their expression. The new Pope has a lovely, kindly face. So let's pray for his goodness. A wonderful, simple, innocent thought there, which expresses what an awful lot of people are going to be thinking now, Joe.
What an uplifting show for a change, John. I'm quite enjoying this. It's been lovely to watch and to listen to. It was lovely listening to you talk as the Pope during this session as well, while you were talking.
Imagine him in my voice.
It was a beautiful moment, and I'm going to take that to the grave with me. It was a real special moment in history to hear you do that, and actually, to witness an incredible moment in history, really.
Yeah, and we'll watch how this plays out, not just for any political implications, but just a man of this significance in such a prominent position of leadership, pointing a way for so many people. I mean, I'm no expert, I'm no judge of these things. I don't know, I couldn't gauge how much influence a new pope or a serving pope or a veteran pope will have on the minds and hearts of people out there in the huge expanse of the Catholic population. But watching and seeing how that plays out is just going to be so fascinating, isn't it, for those of us who watch these things, lucky enough to watch these things as a profession.
Absolutely. It will be fascinating to see, we just talked about there, his relationship with President Trump, his relationship with other political leaders, how he sees the future of the Catholic Church panning out, what he wants to do. Does he want to be a reforming pope? Does he want to be a steady hand on the tiller? He's relatively young, as we said earlier. He's got a lot of years, hopefully, ahead of him. He's got a lot of time to shape the Catholic Church in his own image, if that is what he wants to do. And it'll be fascinating to see.
And are the cardinals expecting a lot? We talked about this being an impressive move for lots of different reasons. Is it partly because there's a pretty controversial American president? Do they think he's going to be able to do something, being American? Is there going to be some advantage they think they can play out there? It'll be interesting to see how it plays out indeed.